I used to believe that raising my son Marcus with unconditional love and endless support would eventually earn me a place in his heart and his home. But I never imagined that his wife Elena would ban me from their housewarming party while living. In the very house I secretly owned, what she didn't know was that I held all the cards and was about to remind them both that disrespect has consequences. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in Millbrook Heights, just as I was tending to my rose garden behind my modest townhouse on Elm Street. Marcus's voice carried that familiar tone of nervous guilt that I'd learned to recognize over his 32 years of life. "Mom, about the housewarming party this Saturday," he began, and I could already hear the defeat in his voice before he continued. "Elena thinks it might be better if you didn't come. She wants it to be just our close friends and, people who really understand our vision for the house." I set down my gardening shears with deliberate care, my hand trembling slightly as the words sank in. "I don't understand our vision?" I asked quietly, keeping my voice steady despite the storm building in my chest. There was a long pause before Marcus spoke again, his words rushing together like he was trying to get them out before losing his nerve. "She just feels like you're always so critical of her decorating choices and her cooking, and she wants this to be a celebration without any tension or negativity." Critical of her decorating choices. In the house that I had purchased with my late husband Robert's life insurance money 3 years ago. The house at 1247 Willowbrook Drive that I had quietly bought through Meridian Properties LLC, a company I'd established specifically to keep my real estate investments private. The house that Marcus and Elena believed they were renting from some anonymous corporate landlord for the incredibly generous rate of $200 per month when comparable properties in their upscale Riverside district were going for $3,500. I had wanted to surprise them eventually. The plan had been to reveal the truth on their 5th wedding anniversary, to hand them the deed as a gift and watch their faces light up with joy and gratitude. I had imagined Elena throwing her arms around me, finally understanding that every suggestion I'd made about paint colors or furniture placement came from a place of love, not criticism. I had dreamed of Marcus realizing that his mother had been supporting their dreams from the shadows all along. Instead, I was being banned from celebrating the home I had given them. "Mom? Are you still there?" Marcus's voice pulled me back to the devastating present. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here," I managed, though my throat felt tight. "If Elena feels that strongly about it, then of course I'll respect her wishes." The relief in his voice was like salt in an open wound. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. Maybe we can have lunch next week, just the two of us." After he hung up, I stood in my garden for a long time, surrounded by the roses that Robert and I had planted together 15 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being excluded from a celebration in my own property by a woman who had never once thanked me for the affordable rent that allowed them to live in their dream neighborhood. Elena Vasquez had entered my son's life 4 years ago, like a whirlwind of ambition and barely concealed disdain for anyone she considered beneath her social aspirations. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a high-end interior design firm, which she somehow parlayed into considering herself an expert on everything from home decor to proper entertaining. From the moment Marcus introduced her, she had made it clear that she found my middle-class background and modest lifestyle somewhat embarrassing. When they got engaged, she insisted on a wedding that cost more than Marcus made in a year. When I gently suggested they might want to start with something smaller and save money for their future, she had given me a smile so cold it could have frozen champagne and said, "Mrs. Richardson, I'm sure your generation was content with simple celebrations, but Marcus and I want something that reflects our actual ambitions." Our actual ambitions. As if 30 years of working as a nurse to put Marcus through college and support his dreams were somehow lesser than her entry-level marketing job and her borrowed designer handbags. But I had bitten my tongue and written the check for half their wedding expenses anyway, because I loved my son and wanted him to be happy. When they struggled to find an affordable place in a good neighborhood, I had quietly purchased the Willowbrook property and arranged for them to rent it through my LLC at a fraction of market rate. When Elena complained that the previous owners had left the walls painted in absolutely ghastly colors, I had anonymously arranged for a $2,000 credit toward repainting through the property management company. Every month for 3 years, I had deposited their $1,200 rent check and smiled, knowing that I was helping them build the life they dreamed of. Every month I had resisted the urge to tell them the truth, wanting it to be a perfect surprise that would finally bridge the gap between Elena and me. Now, as I stood in my garden with my phone still warm in my hand, I realized I had been a fool. Elena didn't want a bridge between us. She wanted me erased from their perfect picture entirely. But what Elena didn't understand was that you can't erase someone who literally owns the frame. As I walked back into my house, passing the framed photo of Robert and me on our wedding day, I made a decision that would change everything. The housewarming party was in 4 days. That gave me just enough time to prepare the kind of surprise that Elena would never forget. After all, every landlord has the right to inspect their property, and it was long past time for the truth to come to light. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The real depth of Elena's feelings about me became crystal clear 3 weeks before that devastating phone call, and like most painful truths, I discovered it entirely by accident. I had stopped by Riverside Shopping Plaza to pick up a birthday gift for my neighbor's daughter when I spotted Marcus and Elena at Cafe Milano, sitting at one of the outdoor tables. My first instinct was to wave and join them, but something about their body language made me pause. Elena was leaning forward intently, her manicured hands gesturing emphatically, while Marcus sat back with his arms crossed, looking uncomfortable. Instead of approaching, I ducked into the bookstore next door, positioning myself near the window where I could see them clearly. Call it mother's intuition, but 32 years of raising Marcus had taught me to recognize when something was seriously wrong. What I overheard changed everything. "Your mother is becoming a real problem, Marcus," Elena's voice carried clearly, across the patio, sharp with frustration. "Did you see how she looked at our new dining room table? Like we'd committed some kind of crime by buying furniture that actually matches our style instead of keeping that hideous hand-me-down set she foisted on us." Marcus shifted in his seat. "She was just trying to be helpful when she gave us that table. It belonged to my grandparents." "Helpful?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "Marcus, your mother doesn't help. She interferes. She criticizes. She acts like we're children who can't make our own decisions about our own home." Our own home. The words hit me like a physical blow. She spoke about my house, the house I was subsidizing to the tune of $2,300 every month, as if it were her sovereign territory that I had no right to comment on. "She means well," Marcus said weakly, but Elena wasn't finished. "Does she? Because yesterday when she stopped by, she actually rearranged my spice rack while I was in the bathroom. Who does that?" And then she had the audacity to suggest that maybe I should learn to cook real food instead of ordering takeout so much. Elena's voice dripped with indignation. "I'm working 60 hours a week trying to build my career. I don't have time to stand over a stove all day like some 1950s housewife." My hands clenched around my purse handle. I had reorganized her spice rack because it was alphabetically chaotic, and I had suggested cooking more often because I'd noticed how much money they were spending on delivery apps. Money, they claimed, they didn't have when Marcus had asked me for help with their car repair bill the month before. "Maybe you could talk to her?" Elena continued. "Set some boundaries? Because honestly, Marcus, I'm getting to the point where I don't want her in our house anymore. She makes me feel judged in my own space. Her own space." Again, the possessive language that cut straight to my heart. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his coffee. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "She's just lonely, Elena. Since Dad died, she doesn't have much else going on." "That's not our responsibility," Elena snapped. "We're not her entertainment committee. And frankly, her constant presence is starting to affect our marriage. I can't relax in my own home because I'm always wondering when she's going to show up with another helpful suggestion or another story about how you used to do things when you were 12. The words stung because there was a grain of truth in them that I couldn't deny. Since Robert's death 3 years ago, Marcus and Elena's home had become my primary source of joy and connection. I had thrown myself into helping them, perhaps, too enthusiastically, because it gave me purpose and made me feel needed. But what Elena didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that every suggestion I made came from a place of genuine love and investment. When I recommended they seal the driveway before winter, it wasn't nagging, it was protecting my property. When I suggested they get their HVAC system serviced, it wasn't interference. It was preventing expensive repairs that I would ultimately have to pay for. "I'll talk to her," Marcus finally agreed, and the defeat in his voice made my chest ache. "But Elena, she's my mom. I can't just cut her out completely." "I'm not asking you to cut her out," Elena said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm asking you to establish healthy boundaries, starting with the housewarming party." My blood went cold. This was 3 weeks before Marcus's phone call, which meant Elena had been planning to exclude me from their celebration for nearly a month. "The housewarming?" Marcus sounded confused. "I've been thinking about it, and I really want our first big party in the house to be perfect. Just our friends, people who understand our vision and aesthetic." "Your mother," Elena paused delicately. "She has a way of making everything about herself, doesn't she? Remember your birthday dinner last month? She spent 20 minutes telling everyone about your childhood while I was trying to have an adult conversation about the housing market." The housing market. I almost laughed at the irony. Elena loved to pontificate about property values and investment strategies, completely unaware that she was lecturing the woman who actually owned the property she was living in. "I want this party to showcase what we've built together," Elena continued. "Our taste, our style, our success. Having your mother there would just complicate the narrative. Our success. Built in a house I had purchased, furnished with money I had loaned them, celebrated with friends who would never know that the successful young couple were paying 1/3 of market rent to the woman they were about to humiliate." As I watched Elena reach across the table and squeeze Marcus's hand, her diamond engagement ring catching the sunlight, the ring that Marcus had been able to afford only because I had quietly paid off his student loans the year before, I realized that this wasn't just about the housewarming party. This was about Elena systematically erasing me from their lives while benefiting from my generosity at every turn. The pattern became clear as I drove home, my mind racing through years of small slights and calculated exclusions. The couple's vacation to Napa Valley that I wasn't invited to join, funded by the money they saved on rent. The intimate dinner parties where Elena would mention forgetting to call me until after the fact. The way she would subtly redirect conversations whenever I started sharing memories or offering advice. Elena wasn't just ungrateful. She was strategically positioning herself as the sole female influence in Marcus's life, using my own kindness as leverage to push me out. But what she had failed to calculate was that some battles can't be won when you don't know who you're really fighting. As I pulled into my driveway on Elm Street, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 3 years, my eyes held something other than grief and loneliness. They held determination. Elena wanted to control the narrative about their success. She was about to learn that some stories have more than one author, and the real author of their housing story was about to reclaim her pen. 2 days after Marcus's devastating phone call about the housewarming party, I received an unexpected visit that would have been laughable if it weren't so calculated in its timing and presentation. I was in my kitchen, reviewing the property management reports from Meridian Properties when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Elena standing on my front porch, holding a large gift bag and wearing what I had come to recognize as her performing sincerity smile, the one she used when she needed something but wanted to appear gracious about asking for it. "Mrs. Richardson," she exclaimed when I opened the door, her voice pitched with artificial warmth. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I brought you something special." She thrust the gift bag toward me with the kind of theatrical flourish that suggested this visit had been carefully rehearsed. Inside was an expensive-looking candle from Nordstrom, still bearing the $78 price tag that she had forgotten to remove. "Elena, what a surprise," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Marcus didn't mention you were coming by." "Oh, he doesn't." "No," she said with a conspiratorial laugh, settling herself on my living room sofa without invitation. "I wanted this to be just between us girls. Mother-to-daughter-in-law bonding time." The phrase mother-to-daughter-in-law felt particularly grating coming from someone who had just banned me from their home celebration. But I maintained my composure and offered her tea. "Actually, Mrs. Richardson, can I call you Margaret? I feel like we've known each other long enough to drop the formalities." She didn't wait for my response before continuing. "I came here because I've been doing some serious soul-searching lately, and I realized that I owe you an enormous apology." I set down my teacup carefully, curious to see where this performance was heading. "I know I haven't always been the most welcoming daughter-in-law," Elena continued, her eyes downcast in a display of practiced contrition. "And I think part of that comes from my own insecurities, honestly. You raise such an incredible man, and sometimes I feel like I can never measure up to the standard you set." The audacity was breathtaking. Here was the woman who had spent 3 years systematically excluding me from their lives, now sitting in my living room and claiming that her hostility stemmed from feeling inadequate compared to my mothering. "Elena, I've never wanted you to feel that way," I said truthfully. "I've only ever wanted to support you both in whatever way I could." "I know that now," she said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "And that's why I feel so terrible about how I've been behaving. Margaret, you've been nothing but generous and kind to us, and I've been a brat, frankly." The word choice was interesting. Brat suggested childish behavior rather than calculated manipulation, positioning her actions as innocent mistakes rather than deliberate strategies. "Marcus doesn't know I'm telling you this," she continued, lowering her voice as if sharing a deep secret. "But we've been having some financial difficulties lately. Nothing serious," she added hastily. "Just some unexpected expenses that have put us in a tight spot temporarily." "Here it comes," I thought, watching her face carefully. "My car needs major repairs. The transmission is completely shot, and you know how expensive those European imports can be to fix." The estimate came back at $4,200, which honestly, we just don't have right now with everything else going on. She paused, allowing the weight of this revelation to settle between us. "And then there's the house," she said with a carefully modulated sigh. "We love living on Willowbrook Drive, obviously, but lately the rent has been feeling like such a burden. Marcus has been working overtime to cover all our expenses, and I hate seeing him so stressed." I felt my jaw tighten. The rent that was already subsidized by over $2,000 per month was feeling like a burden. "Have you looked into other options?" I asked mildly. Elena's eyes flashed with something that looked like panic before she quickly recovered. "Well, we've considered it. But honestly, Margaret, we've put so much work into making that house our home. The renovations we've done, the garden I've started, it would break my heart to leave now." The renovations she was referring to were the ones I had approved and partially funded through the property management company. The garden was planted in soil that I technically owned. "Besides," she continued, "our lease isn't up for another 18 months, and breaking it would cost us a fortune in penalties." This was news to me, since the lease I had approved through Meridian Properties was month to month to give them maximum flexibility. I was hoping, Elena said, and here was the real purpose of her visit, that maybe you might be able to help us out temporarily. Just until Marcus gets his promotion. He's being considered for a senior position that would come with a significant salary increase. What kind of help are you thinking of? I asked, though I already knew. Well, if you could, loan us the money for my car repairs, that would be incredible. And I was wondering if maybe, given your experience with real estate investments, you might have some connections in property management. Someone who might be able to talk to our landlord about reducing our rent temporarily. The sheer brazenness took my breath away. She was asking me to both loan her money directly and to somehow negotiate with myself to lower the rent I was already charging them at a massive loss. I know it's a lot to ask, Elena continued, but I promise we'd pay you back as soon as Marcus gets his promotion. And honestly, I think this could be a really good opportunity for us to reset our relationship. I've realized that I've been pushing you away when I should have been embracing you as the mother figure I never really had. The mother figure she never really had. This was Elena's masterstroke, repositioning her previous hostility as emotional damage from her own childhood, making me feel responsible for healing her wounds while simultaneously asking me to subsidize her lifestyle. My own mother died when I was 16, she continued, right on cue. And I think part of me has been afraid to get too close to you because I couldn't bear the idea of losing another mother figure. But that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to Marcus. I had known about Elena's mother's death, of course, but this was the first time she had ever mentioned it to me directly, and the timing felt calculated to maximize its emotional impact. So what do you say? Elena asked, her eyes bright with manufactured hope. Could you help us out? I promise things will be different between us going forward. I want to include you more, ask for your advice, really treat you like the family you are. The irony was suffocating. She was promising to treat me like family while asking for a $4,200 loan and rent reduction on a property I already owned, just days after banning me from their housewarming party. I'll need to think about it, I said carefully. The car repair loan is one thing, but I'm not sure what connections I might have in property management. Elena's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Of course, I totally understand. I'm just grateful that you're even considering it. She stood to leave, then turned back as if struck by a sudden thought. Oh, and Margaret, I hope you understand why we had to keep the housewarming party small. It's nothing personal. We just wanted our first big entertaining event to be intimate and low-key. But I promise, the next party we throw, you'll be the first person we invite. The next party. As if there would be a next party in my house after this revelation of their true feelings and financial demands. That's very kind of you, Elena, I said, walking her to the door. After she left, I sat in my living room staring at the $78 candle she had brought as a prop for her performance. The scent was called New Beginnings, which felt like either cosmic irony or Elena's idea of a joke. She was right about one thing, though. This was definitely going to be a new beginning, just not the kind she was expecting. As I reached for my phone to call my attorney, I realized that Elena had just made a critical error. She had revealed not just her financial desperation, but her complete lack of awareness about who she was really dealing with, and that ignorance was about to become very, very expensive. After Elena's theatrical performance in my living room, I made what appeared to be a generous decision, but was actually the first move in a much larger game. I called Marcus the next morning and told him I would be happy to help with Elena's car repairs, but that I wanted to handle the payment directly with the auto shop to ensure the work was done properly. Mom, that's incredibly generous, Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. Elena will be so grateful. She's been so stressed about getting to work with the car situation. What Marcus didn't know was that I had already contacted Wilhelm's European Auto Repair on Prospect Avenue, the shop Elena had mentioned, and discovered some very interesting information. According to Hans Wilhelm himself, no one by the name of Elena Vasquez had brought in any vehicle for transmission work. In fact, they hadn't had a single transmission repair estimate over $2,000 in the past 3 months. Elena had fabricated the entire crisis. But rather than confront her immediately, I decided to play along and see just how deep her deception ran. I told Marcus I would cover the repair costs and asked if it would be possible for me to be present when Elena dropped off the car, since I wanted to discuss the work directly with the mechanics. This created an interesting dilemma for Elena. She couldn't very well refuse my generous offer to pay, but she also couldn't produce a car that needed the repairs she had claimed. What followed was a masterclass in watching someone dig themselves deeper into a hole of their own making. Elena called me that afternoon, her voice tight with what she tried to pass off as embarrassment. "Margaret, you're so sweet to offer to come with me to the shop, but I actually took the car in this morning for a second opinion, and it turns out the problem might not be as serious as they first thought." "Oh, that's wonderful news," I said cheerfully. "Which shop did you take it to?" There was a pause. Jensen's Auto over on Madison Street. They think it might just need a fluid change and some minor adjustments. Much less expensive. Jensen's Auto had been closed for renovations for the past month, a fact I knew because I drove past it daily on my way to the grocery store. But I didn't mention this to Elena. "That's such a relief," I said instead. "But you know what? Since I was prepared to help with the car situation, why don't I come over for dinner this week? I could cook for you and Marcus, give you both a break from all the stress you've been under." I could practically hear Elena's internal struggle. She couldn't refuse without seeming ungrateful, but having me in their house, my house, for an extended period would make it harder for her to maintain her various deceptions. That would be lovely," she said finally. "How about Thursday evening?" Thursday gave me 3 days to prepare, and I used them well. I visited Meridian Properties' actual office, a small but legitimate property management company I had hired to handle the day-to-day operations of my rental properties. Sarah Chen, who managed the account, was happy to provide me with detailed reports about 1247 Willowbrook Drive. What I learned was fascinating. Elena and Marcus had submitted multiple maintenance requests over the past year, all of which had been approved and handled promptly. They had requested and received approval for painting the entire interior, installing new light fixtures, and even upgrading the kitchen appliances. The total cost of these improvements came to nearly $8,000, all of which I had unknowingly funded through the property management company. But more interesting were the maintenance requests that had been denied. Elena had asked for permission to remove the original hardwood floors and install marble tile throughout the main level, a request that would have cost $15,000 and significantly altered the character of the house. When that was denied, she had submitted a request to install a hot tub on the back deck, which was also rejected for structural reasons. Sarah also mentioned that Elena had called multiple times asking about the possibility of converting the lease to a rent-to-own agreement, claiming that the current owners might be interested in selling. Each time, Sarah had explained that the property owners had no intention of selling, but Elena had continued to ask. "She seems really invested in making this place her permanent home," Sarah observed. "Some tenants get that way. They start thinking of rental properties as theirs and forget they're just borrowing the space. Borrowing the space. If only Elena knew how literally true that was." Thursday evening arrived, and I showed up at my own house carrying bags of groceries and a bottle of wine. Elena greeted me at the door with an enthusiasm that seemed forced but determined. "Margaret, come in, come in. You didn't have to bring so much food." As I entered the foyer, I was struck by how different the house looked from when I had last been inside. The walls, which had been a warm cream color when I purchased the property, were now painted in various shades of gray and white that Elena had chosen. The original brass light fixtures had been replaced with modern chrome ones that clashed with the house's traditional architecture. I love what you've done with the place, I said. And I wasn't entirely lying. Elena had good taste, even if her choices didn't suit the house's character. Thank you. Elena beamed, clearly pleased by the compliment. I've been working so hard to make this place feel like home. You know how it is when you rent. You're limited in what you can do, but I've been trying to work within those constraints. Limited in what she could do. She had essentially renovated the entire main floor of my house with my money and was now acting as if she had been operating under restrictions. Marcus emerged from the kitchen, and I noticed he looked tired in a way that seemed to go beyond normal work stress. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost weight since I had last seen him. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a hug. "Thanks for doing this. Elena's been so excited about cooking for you." "I thought you were cooking," Elena said quickly, turning to Marcus with a sharp look. Well, I figured since you're so much better at it than I am," Marcus began, but Elena cut him off. "Actually, Margaret, would you mind if we ordered takeout instead? I've been having such a stressful week at work, and I'm just not feeling up to cooking a big meal." This was interesting. Elena had specifically invited me over for a home-cooked dinner, but now she was backing out. I wondered if this was part of a pattern. "Of course, that's fine," I said. "What kind of food were you thinking?" "There's this amazing Thai place that delivers," Elena said, already reaching for her phone. "They're a bit pricey, but the quality is incredible." As Elena placed an order that came to $89 for 3 people, I noticed Marcus wince slightly at the total. When she hung up, he said quietly, "Honey, maybe we should have gotten something a little less expensive?" "Marcus, your mother is our guest," Elena said with a tight smile. "We're not going to feed her cheap takeout." But I was noticing other things as well. The house was immaculate in a way that suggested Elena had spent considerable time preparing for my visit, but there were signs of tension beneath the surface. Marcus was checking his phone frequently, and when it buzzed with what appeared to be a text message, Elena shot him a look that made him quickly put it away. During dinner, Elena dominated the conversation, telling elaborate stories about her work at the design firm and her various social commitments. She name-dropped expensive restaurants and events with the casual air of someone trying to establish their social status. "We went to the opening of that new gallery downtown last weekend," she said. "The one in the converted warehouse? It was invitation only, very exclusive. I wore that black dress from Saks. You know, the one I showed you, Marcus?" Marcus nodded absently, but I noticed he didn't seem to remember the dress or the gallery opening. As the evening progressed, I began to understand the dynamic that had developed in my house. Elena had created an elaborate fiction about their lifestyle and social status, one that required constant maintenance and increasing financial resources to sustain. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to be struggling under the weight of expectations he couldn't meet. When Elena excused herself to take a phone call from work at 9:30 p.m. on a Thursday, which seemed suspicious, Marcus and I were left alone in the dining room. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked gently. "You seem tired." Marcus rubbed his eyes and nodded. "Just work stuff, Mom. Nothing to worry about." But something in his voice told me there was more to it than work stress. Before I could ask anything else, Elena returned, all smiles and apologies. "Sorry about that. Crisis at the office. You know how it is." As I prepared to leave, Elena walked me to the door with what seemed like genuine warmth. "This was so nice, Margaret. We should do it more often." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. Not because I enjoyed Elena's performance, but because I was learning things about the situation that I hadn't understood before. Driving home, I reflected on the evening's revelations. Elena wasn't just manipulative. She was desperate. The expensive lifestyle she was projecting was clearly unsustainable, and Marcus was bearing the brunt of the financial and emotional pressure. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that my house had become the foundation for an elaborate deception that was destroying my son's peace of mind. It was time to start documenting everything more carefully. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted to have a complete picture of exactly what had been happening under my own roof. The moment that shattered my last vestige of tolerance came exactly 1 week after my dinner at Willowbrook Drive, and it involved something so precious to me that Elena's callous destruction of it felt like a declaration of war. I had been visiting my late husband Robert's grave at Greenwood Cemetery, as I did every Sunday morning since his passing. It was a ritual that brought me peace, cleaning his headstone, replacing the flowers, and spending a quiet hour telling him about my week. This particular Sunday was overcast and drizzly, the kind of weather that made the cemetery feel especially solemn. As I arranged fresh chrysanthemums by Robert's grave, my phone rang. It was Marcus, and something in his voice immediately put me on alert. "Mom, I'm really sorry to bother you, but there's been an accident at the house." My heart clenched. "What kind of accident? Are you hurt? Is Elena okay?" "We're fine physically," Marcus said quickly. "But there's been some damage, and Elena thinks we should call the insurance company. I wasn't sure if we should handle it through our renter's insurance or if this is something the landlord should deal with." The irony of my son asking me how to handle insurance claims on my own property wasn't lost on me, but I kept my voice steady. "What happened exactly?" Elena was trying to hang a new mirror in the dining room, one of those really heavy decorative ones. The wall mount failed, and when it fell, it hit it hit this antique cabinet that was there. The mirror shattered and the cabinet got pretty banged up. My blood went cold. "Which cabinet, Marcus?" There was a pause. "The wooden one with all the carved details. It was against the far wall of the dining room." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache of loss wash over me. He was talking about Robert's grandmother's china cabinet, a 150-year-old piece of German craftsmanship that had been in his family for generations. It was the one piece of furniture I had specifically asked them to be careful around, explaining its history and sentimental value when they first moved in. "How badly damaged is it?" I managed to ask. "Pretty bad, Mom. One of the glass panels is completely shattered, and there's a big gouge in the wood where the mirror hit it. Elena feels terrible about it." I seriously doubted that Elena felt terrible about anything other than potentially having to pay for the damage. "I'll be right over," I said, standing up from Robert's grave with trembling legs. "Actually, Mom, maybe it's better if you don't come today. Elena's really upset, and she's worried you'll be angry with her. She's already called 3 different repair shops to get estimates. Marcus, I need to see the damage myself. I know, but maybe tomorrow? Elena just needs some time to process this. You know how she gets when she feels like she's disappointed someone." The manipulation was breathtaking. Elena had destroyed an irreplaceable family heirloom through her own carelessness, and somehow I was being positioned as the potential villain for wanting to assess the damage to my own property. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth, "but I want to see it first thing tomorrow morning." After hanging up, I sat in my car in the cemetery parking lot, shaking with a rage I hadn't felt since Robert's death. That china cabinet had been more than furniture to me. It was a tangible connection to Robert's family history, a piece I had lovingly maintained and planned to pass down to Marcus someday. But my anger was about more than just the cabinet. It was about the pattern of entitlement and carelessness that Elena had displayed from the beginning, now culminating in the destruction of something irreplaceable. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since becoming a landlord. I drove to Willowbrook Drive and parked across the street from my own house. I wanted to see for myself what was happening inside. What I observed made my blood boil even hotter. Through the dining room window, I could see Elena and Marcus hosting what appeared to be a dinner party. There were at least 6 people seated. Around the table, wine glasses glinting in the candlelight, everyone laughing and having what looked like a wonderful time. The destroyed china cabinet was nowhere to be seen. In its place stood a sleek, modern sideboard that I had never seen before. Elena had already replaced my family heirloom with something that suited her aesthetic preferences. I sat in my car watching the party unfold, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. These people were entertaining guests in my house, eating off dishes I had subsidized, celebrating their lives while carelessly discarding mine, and they had just thrown away a piece of my family's history like it was disposable furniture. But what happened next pushed me completely over the edge. As I watched, Elena stood up from the table and gestured toward the new sideboard, clearly telling some story to her guests. I could see her animated expressions, her hand gestures, the way she commanded the attention of the room. Whatever she was saying, it was entertaining. People were laughing and nodding. Then one of the guests, a woman with short blonde hair, pointed toward the corner where Robert's cabinet had stood and said something that made Elena throw back her head and laugh. It was the kind of unrestrained laughter that comes from sharing a particularly amusing anecdote. Elena was entertaining her guests with the story of destroying my family heirloom. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. She wasn't apologetic or remorseful about what had happened. She was turning it into dinner party entertainment, probably spinning some tale about clumsy accidents and replacing old junk with proper furniture. That's when I noticed something else that made my vision blur with fury. Through the window, I could see Elena's dining room wall, where a new mirror hung, obviously the replacement for the one that had supposedly fallen and caused all the damage. But this wasn't just any mirror. It was an enormous, ornate piece with an elaborate gold frame that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The kind of statement piece that Elena loved to showcase as evidence of her sophisticated taste. The accident hadn't been an accident at all. Elena had deliberately destroyed Robert's family cabinet to make room for her own decorating vision, then concocted the story about the falling mirror to avoid taking responsibility for the damage. She had calculated that it would be easier to ask forgiveness than permission, and she had been counting on my love for Marcus to prevent me from making too much trouble about it. As I watched her gesturing grandly in front of her new mirror, telling her guests whatever fiction she had invented about the cabinet's disappearance, I made a decision that would change everything. Elena had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had destroyed something irreplaceable that connected me to Robert and his family's history, then turned that destruction into entertainment for strangers. But more than that, she had revealed the depth of her contempt for me and everything I represented in her life. I wasn't a person to her. I was an obstacle to be managed, a source of resources to be exploited, and now, apparently, a source of amusing stories to share with her friends. I started my car and drove home, my mind crystal clear for the first time in months. Elena wanted to play games with my property and my family's legacy. She was about to discover that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The gloves were officially off. As I pulled into my driveway on Elm Street, I realized that Elena had just made the biggest mistake of her manipulative life. She had given me the perfect justification for everything I was about to do. Because when someone destroys something precious that can never be replaced, they forfeit any claim to mercy or consideration. And Elena was about to learn that lesson, in the most devastating way possible. The discovery that would escalate this conflict from personal betrayal to something far more sinister came 3 days after witnessing Elena's dinner party celebration of destroying Robert's cabinet. I had been struggling with insomnia since that night, alternating between grief and rage, when I decided to take a late-night drive to clear my head. It was nearly midnight when I found myself parked outside Willowbrook Drive again, not really sure why I had come back. The house was dark except for a single light in what I knew was Marcus and Elena's bedroom. I was about to leave when I saw Elena's silhouette move past the window, and something about her posture, hunched over what appeared to be a laptop, made me curious enough to wait. 20 minutes later, Elena emerged from the house dressed in dark clothing, carrying a large manila envelope. She looked around nervously before getting into her car and driving away. The secretive nature of her departure at such an unusual hour sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. I followed her at a distance, my heart pounding as she drove through the empty streets of Millbrook Heights. She pulled into the parking lot of Denny's on Route 47, a 24-hour diner that seemed an odd choice for a midnight meeting. I parked several spaces away and watched as Elena entered the restaurant. Through the large windows, I could see her slide into a booth across from a man I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, wearing a rumpled suit, with the kind of face that suggested he wasn't accustomed to late-night meetings in diners. Elena handed him the manila envelope, and I watched as he opened it and began examining its contents. Their conversation was animated but hushed, and I found myself wishing I could hear what they were discussing. After about 30 minutes, the man handed Elena what appeared to be a business card, shook her hand, and left. Elena remained in the booth for another 10 minutes, staring at the card and occasionally glancing at her phone. I followed her home and waited until she was safely inside before driving back to Elm Street, my mind racing with possibilities. What kind of business required midnight meetings in diners? What had been in that envelope? The next morning, I called Sarah Chen at Meridian Properties with a request that I hoped would seem routine. Sarah, I'm considering having some updates done to the Willowbrook property, and I want to make sure I have all the current documentation. Could you send me copies of the original lease agreement and any modifications that have been made? Avi. Course, Mrs. Richardson. I'll email everything over within the hour. When the documents arrived, I spread them across my dining room table and began reading through them carefully. The original lease was straightforward. A month-to-month agreement for $1,200 per month, with standard clauses about maintenance, responsibilities, and tenant obligations. But there was something else in the file that made my blood run cold. Attached to the lease was a document I had never seen before, a tenant property improvement agreement that had apparently been signed by both Marcus and Elena 6 months ago. According to this document, they had invested $12,000 of their own money in permanent improvements to the property, including the kitchen appliance upgrades, bathroom renovations, and the installation of built-in shelving systems throughout the house. The agreement included a clause stating that if the tenants were ever forced to vacate the property due to landlord action rather than tenant default, they would be entitled to compensation for these improvements at current market value. I stared at the document in disbelief. This was completely fabricated. I had funded all the improvements myself through the property management company. There had never been any tenant investment of $12,000, and I had certainly never agreed to compensate them if they moved out. But the signatures looked authentic, and the document bore the official letterhead of Meridian Properties. I called Sarah immediately. Sarah, I'm looking at this tenant property improvement agreement, and I'm confused about when this was executed. I don't remember approving any such arrangement. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Richardson, I'm not sure what document you're referring to. We don't typically handle tenant improvement agreements. That would be something between you and the tenants directly. But it has your company's letterhead. That's very strange. Could you fax me a copy? I'd like to see exactly what you're looking at. 20 minutes later, Sarah called back, her voice tight with concern. Mrs. Richardson, this document is completely fraudulent. That's not our letterhead. It's a good imitation, but there are several elements that are wrong. The font is different, the logo placement is slightly off, and we would never execute a document like this without your explicit approval. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. Elena had forged legal documents to create a false paper trail that would entitle her to compensation if they were ever evicted from my property. But the implications went far deeper than simple fraud. This suggested that Elena was already planning for the possibility of being forced to leave the house, and she was setting up a financial safety net that would allow her to extract thousands of dollars from me in the process. I spent the rest, of the day researching tenant rights and property law, trying to understand exactly what Elena might have been planning. What I discovered was chilling. In our state, tenants who make substantial improvements to rental properties can, under certain circumstances, claim compensation if they're forced to move due to landlord action. But the key word was substantial. Improvements that significantly increased the property value and were made with the landlord's knowledge and consent. Elena had created fake documentation to make it appear as though she and Marcus had invested their own money in improving my property when, in reality, I had funded everything myself. If she ever needed to leave the house, she could potentially sue me for thousands of dollars in compensation for improvements that I had actually paid for myself. But there was something even more disturbing about the timeline. The forged document was dated 6 months ago, well before any of the recent tensions about the housewarming party or her request for financial help. This meant Elena had been planning some kind of exit strategy for months, possibly even before she had started her campaign to exclude me from their lives. The midnight meeting at Denny's suddenly made sense. Elena had been consulting with someone, possibly a lawyer or a paralegal, about her options for extracting money from the landlord of her rental property. She didn't know that the landlord was me, but she was already preparing to defraud whoever owned the house she was living in. That evening, I did something I had never done before as a property owner. I hired a private investigator. Detective Ray Kowalski came highly recommended by my attorney, and he listened to my story with the kind of professional detachment that made me feel both reassured and slightly embarrassed about the complexity of the situation I had created. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said, reviewing his notes. "You own the property where your son and daughter-in-law live, but they don't know you're the landlord. The daughter-in-law has been systematically manipulating you for financial support while simultaneously planning to defraud the landlord, who is you, through falsified documents." "That's correct. And you want me to investigate the man she met with at Denny's to determine whether she's working with someone to commit fraud against you?" "Yes. I need to know exactly what she's planning and whether there are other people involved." Ray nodded slowly. "This is definitely one of the more unusual cases I've handled, but I think I can help you. Give me a week, and I'll have a full report on Ms. Vasquez's activities and associates." As Ray left my house, I realized that Elena's midnight meeting had revealed something far more dangerous than simple greed or manipulation. She was actively planning to commit fraud against me, using forged documents and possibly legal counsel to extract money she wasn't entitled to. This wasn't just about disrespect or family drama anymore. Elena was planning to steal from me using the legal system itself as her weapon. But what she didn't understand was that her entire scheme was built on a foundation of lies that I had the power to expose at any moment. The question was no longer whether I would reveal the truth about my ownership of the house. The question was when and how much damage Elena would do to herself before I brought her carefully constructed house of cards crashing down around her. As I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at the forged document that could have cost me thousands of dollars, I realized that Elena had crossed the final line. She wasn't just manipulating me anymore. She was preparing to rob me, and that changed everything. Detective Ray Kowalski's report arrived exactly 1 week after I hired him, and its contents were even more damaging than I had anticipated. The man Elena had met with at Denny's was Trevor Hutchins, a disbarred attorney who now worked as a legal consultant, specializing in what he euphemistically called tenant advocacy services. According to Ray's investigation, Hutchins had helped Elena forge not just the improvement agreement I had discovered, but an entire portfolio of fake documents designed to maximize her potential compensation from any future landlord dispute. This included falsified receipts for materials and labor, backdated correspondence with fictional contractors, and even staged photographs showing Elena and Marcus supposedly doing renovation work themselves. But the most shocking revelation was that Elena had been planning this scheme for almost a year, well before any of our recent conflicts. She had specifically chosen to rent from a property management company rather than dealing directly with individual landlords, because she believed corporate entities would be easier to defraud and less likely to investigate questionable claims thoroughly. Elena had been playing a long game from the very beginning, and I had been nothing more than an unwitting pawn in her larger strategy. The report also revealed that this wasn't Elena's first attempt at tenant fraud. She had tried a similar scheme in her previous apartment in Westfield, claiming $8,000 in improvement costs when she moved out. That case had been settled out of court for $3,500, which explained how Elena had learned to refine her methods. Armed with this information, I realized that simply confronting Elena or revealing my identity as the landlord wouldn't be enough. She had already demonstrated that she would lie, forge documents, and potentially sue anyone who stood in her way. I needed to be smarter and more strategic than she was. That's when I decided to give Elena exactly what she wanted, the perfect opportunity to execute her fraud scheme. I called Sarah Chen at Meridian Properties and arranged what I told her was a routine property inspection and market value assessment. What I was actually doing was setting up the conditions that would allow Elena to reveal the full extent of her fraudulent plans while documenting everything for potential legal action. I want to have the property professionally appraised, I told Sarah. And I'd like to review all the tenant improvement claims. Please schedule a time when both tenants can be present to discuss any work they've done on the property. Sarah scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. What Elena and Marcus didn't know was that the independent appraiser would actually be James Morrison, a certified property assessor who specialized in insurance fraud cases and had been briefed on the situation by my attorney. I also arranged for the meeting to be recorded, with Morrison wearing a discreet recording device that would capture every word of Elena's presentation about the improvements she claimed to have funded. The morning of the inspection, I positioned myself in a coffee shop across from Willowbrook Drive where I could observe the proceedings through a pair of binoculars. At exactly 2 p.m., Morrison arrived at the house in an official-looking van marked Riverside Property Assessment Services. Elena greeted him at the door, and I could see her animated gestures even from my distant vantage point. She had clearly prepared extensively for this moment, probably seeing it as her opportunity to establish the paper trail that would support her eventual fraud claim. What I witnessed over the next 2 hours was a masterclass in deception. Elena led Morrison through every room of the house, pointing out improvements and presenting her falsified documentation. I watched her pull out a thick folder of papers, presumably the fake receipts and contractor agreements that Hutchins had helped her create. Marcus seemed uncomfortable throughout the process, frequently checking his phone and occasionally trying to interject comments that Elena would quickly override. At one point, I saw him gesture toward what looked like a genuine concern about something Elena was claiming, but she shut him down with a sharp look that was visible even from across the street. The inspection lasted nearly 3 hours, during which Elena presented her fabricated case that she and Marcus had invested over $15,000 of their own money in property improvements. This was a significant increase from the $12,000 claimed in the forged documents, suggesting that Elena was inflating her story even further when given the opportunity to speak directly to someone she believed represented the landlord's interests. When Morrison finally left the house, Elena stood in the doorway watching his van drive away with an expression of satisfaction that made my stomach turn. She believed she had just secured her financial safety net through an elaborate performance based entirely on lies. What Elena didn't know was that Morrison had documented every false claim, photographed every piece of fabricated evidence, and recorded every word of her fraudulent presentation. She had just provided us with enough evidence to prosecute her for forgery, fraud, and conspiracy, but I wasn't finished yet. That evening, I called Marcus directly. "Sweetheart, I heard you had a property inspection today. How did it go?" "It was intense," Marcus said, and I could hear the strain in his voice. Elena had all these documents about work we've supposedly done on the house. Some of it I didn't even remember doing. This was the opening I had been hoping for. Marcus was clearly uncomfortable with Elena's claims, which suggested he might not be fully complicit in her fraud scheme. "What kind of work?" I asked casually. "Well, according to Elena, we spent thousands of dollars on kitchen upgrades and bathroom renovations. But Mom, I swear I don't remember us paying for most of that stuff. I thought the property management company handled those improvements." My heart ached for Marcus. He was finally beginning to see through Elena's deceptions, but he was trapped in a situation where questioning her would mean acknowledging that their entire living situation was built on lies. "That does sound confusing," I said gently. "Maybe you should ask Elena to show you the receipts and contracts. It's important to keep good records of that kind of investment." "Yeah, maybe I will," Marcus said, though he didn't sound confident about confronting his wife. 2 days later, Ray Kowalski called with an update that confirmed my suspicions about Marcus's level of involvement. "I've been monitoring their communications," he said, "and it appears your son is becoming increasingly uncomfortable with his wife's claims about the property improvements. He's been asking her questions about the documentation, and she's been getting defensive and evasive in response." "Do you think he knows she's committing fraud?" "I don't think he understands the full scope of what she's doing, but he's definitely suspicious. There are text messages between them where he's questioning specific expenses and asking to see original receipts. She keeps putting him off or changing the subject." This gave me hope that Marcus might be salvageable from the wreckage that was about to engulf Elena's carefully constructed deception. The final piece of my countertrap was put in place when Morrison submitted his official assessment report to Meridian Properties. The report documented every fraudulent claim Elena had made, complete with photographic evidence and detailed explanations of why each claim was either impossible or inconsistent with the property's actual history. Morrison's report also included a professional opinion that the tenant appeared to be attempting to defraud the property owner through falsified documentation and inflated improvement claims. Sarah Chen called me the day after receiving Morrison's report, her voice tight with concern. "Mrs. Richardson, we have a serious problem with the Willowbrook property. It appears your tenants are trying to commit fraud against you using forged documents and false claims about property improvements. What do you recommend we do?" I asked, though I already knew exactly what I wanted to happen. We need to document everything and potentially involve law enforcement. This kind of fraud can result in criminal charges, not just civil liability. "Let me think about it over the weekend," I said. "I'll call you Monday with my decision about how to proceed." But I had already made my decision. Elena had walked directly into the trap I had set for her, providing documented evidence of her fraudulent scheme while simultaneously revealing the full extent of her deception to a certified professional, who could testify in court if necessary. The hunter had definitely become the hunted, and Elena had no idea that her carefully planned fraud scheme had just been turned against her with devastating effectiveness. All that remained was to decide exactly when and how to spring the final part of the trap that would expose not just Elena's fraud, but the deeper truth about who really held all the power in this situation. Elena thought she was playing chess, while I was playing checkers. She was about to discover that I had been playing a completely different game all along. Monday morning arrived with crisp October air and the kind of clarity that comes from having a perfectly executed plan ready to unfold. I had spent the weekend finalizing the details of what I had come to think of as Elena's reckoning, and every piece was now in position. My first call was to Sarah Chen at Meridian Properties. "Sarah, I've decided to proceed with formal action regarding the fraudulent tenant claims, but I want to handle this strategically. Can you send official notice to the tenants that we'll need to conduct a comprehensive audit of all claimed improvements, with independent verification of all receipts and contractor agreements?" "Absolutely, Mrs. Richardson. That's exactly the right approach. We'll request that they provide original documentation for every improvement claim within 10 business days." "Perfect. And Sarah? I want the notice to mention that any discrepancies found during the audit could result in lease termination and potential legal action. Let's see how they respond when they realize their documentation will be professionally scrutinized. What Elena didn't know was that this audit request would force her to either admit her fraud or double down on her deception by providing more fake documents. Either choice would work in my favor. My second call was to my attorney, Patricia Valdez, who had been quietly preparing for this moment since I first discovered Elena's forged improvement agreement. Patricia, it's time to implement Phase 2. I want you to begin the process of establishing clear legal ownership documentation for all the improvements made to the Willowbrook property. I need irrefutable proof that every upgrade was funded through my accounts via the property management company. I've already started compiling that evidence, Patricia said. We have bank records, contractor invoices, and receipts for every legitimate improvement made to the property. The paper trail clearly shows that all funds came from your accounts, not from the tenants. Good. I also want you to prepare a formal complaint about the fraudulent documents. If Elena continues with this scheme, I want to be ready to file criminal charges immediately. My third move was more personal and potentially more devastating than the legal maneuvering. I called Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Elena's supervisor at Hartwell Design Group, where Elena worked as a marketing coordinator. Dr. Walsh, this is Margaret Richardson. I believe you know my daughter-in-law, Elena Vasquez. Of course, Elena's mentioned you several times. How can I help you? I'm calling because I've discovered some concerning information about Elena's conduct outside of work, and I felt I should bring it to your attention since it involves potential criminal activity. There was a pause. That's very serious. What kind of criminal activity are we talking about? Document forgery and fraud, related to her rental property. She's been creating fake legal documents and fraudulent receipts to support false claims against her landlord. I have professional assessments and recorded evidence of her presenting these fabricated documents as genuine. Mrs. Richardson, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Obviously, any criminal charges against an employee would be a serious concern for our firm. Can you provide me with documentation? I'll have my attorney send you a summary of the evidence this afternoon. I wanted to give you advance notice in case this becomes a public legal matter. What Elena had never mentioned to me, but what I had learned through Ray Kowalski's investigation, was that Hartwell Design Group had recently been competing for several high-profile municipal contracts that required employees to pass detailed background checks. Any hint of criminal activity could not only cost Elena her job, but potentially damage the firm's reputation and business prospects. By Wednesday, Elena's world began to unravel with the precision of a controlled demolition. The audit notice from Meridian Properties arrived via certified mail, requiring Elena to provide original documentation for all improvement claims within 10 business days. According to Ray, who had been monitoring their communications, Elena's reaction was immediate and panicked. She called Trevor Hutchins 3 times that afternoon, each conversation growing more frantic. Ray had managed to record portions of these calls, and Elena's desperation was evident in every word. Trevor, they want original receipts and contractor agreements. Everything has to be independently verified. What am I supposed to do? Hutchins apparently advised Elena to stick to the story and promised to provide additional documentation to support her claims. What he didn't realize was that we were now monitoring his activities as well, and any new fake documents he created would only add to the criminal charges he would eventually face. Meanwhile, Dr. Walsh had received Patricia's evidence summary and called Elena into her office for what Elena apparently believed was a routine meeting about upcoming projects. According to the report I received later, Dr. Walsh had questioned Elena about her rental situation and her claims about property improvements. Elena, unaware that her supervisor now knew about the fraud allegations, had enthusiastically repeated her lies about the $15,000 in improvements she and Marcus had supposedly funded themselves. Dr. Walsh had listened to Elena's detailed description of renovation work and contractor relationships, taking careful notes that would later be compared to the evidence of Elena's fraudulent claims. By Thursday, Elena was juggling multiple crises that she couldn't possibly understand were all connected. Ray's surveillance showed her making increasingly desperate phone calls to contractors, trying to get them to provide backdated invoices that would support her false claims. Most of the legitimate contractors she contacted refused to participate in what they clearly recognized as fraud, but Elena's attempts to solicit false documentation were being recorded and would serve as additional evidence of her criminal intent. Friday brought the coup de grace of Elena's systematic destruction. Marcus finally confronted her about the improvement documentation. According to Ray's recording devices, which had captured audio from outside their bedroom window, Marcus had demanded to see the original receipts for the kitchen and bathroom improvements Elena claimed they had funded. "Elena, I've been thinking about this audit request, and I can't remember us writing checks for most of this work. Can you show me our bank statements from when we supposedly paid for these improvements?" Elena's response was to deflect and accuse Marcus of not trusting her, but Marcus had apparently reached his limit. "I looked through our financial records going back 2 years, Marcus said, his voice steady but strained. "There are no withdrawals or checks that match these improvement costs. Elena, where did this money supposedly come from?" The argument that followed was explosive. Elena accused Marcus of undermining her, while Marcus demanded honest answers about their financial situation and their claims about the house improvements. The recording captured Elena finally admitting that she had adjusted some dates and amounts on the documentation, but claiming it was justified because they had invested so much time and energy in making the house their home. "Time and energy don't equal $15,000 in material costs," Marcus had responded. "Elena, if you falsified these documents, we could be facing serious legal problems." By Saturday, Elena's desperation had reached a breaking point. Ray observed her meeting again with Trevor Hutchins, this time at a McDonald's on the other side of town. Their conversation, partially recorded through long-range surveillance equipment, revealed that Elena was now asking Hutchins to help her create documentation that would support a quick exit from the rental property before the audit could be completed. Elena was planning to abandon her fraud scheme and flee, but she wanted to extract as much money as possible on her way out. What she didn't realize was that every move she made was being documented, every lie was being recorded, and every desperate attempt to cover her tracks was actually making her legal situation worse. The systematic dismantling of Elena's life was proceeding exactly as I had planned. Her job was in jeopardy. Her marriage was fracturing under the weight of her deceptions, her fraud scheme was collapsing under professional scrutiny, and her attempts to escape were only creating more evidence of her criminal intent. But the most beautiful part of the entire strategy was that Elena still had no idea who was orchestrating her downfall. She believed she was fighting some anonymous corporate landlord and dealing with unrelated personal and professional crises. She had no clue that the woman she had systematically betrayed and humiliated was the architect of every single problem now threatening to destroy her carefully constructed life. The hunter had indeed become the hunted, and Elena was about to discover that some prey fight back with far more intelligence and resources than she had ever imagined possible. The moment I had been preparing for arrived on a gray Tuesday morning when Elena's 10-day deadline to provide audit documentation had expired. She had submitted nothing, not a single original receipt, not one legitimate contractor agreement, not even an attempt at providing the fake documents she had shown to James Morrison during the inspection. According to Sarah Chen, Elena had called Meridian Properties 3 times requesting extensions, claiming that her documentation was temporarily misplaced and that she needed more time to organize her records. Each request had been politely denied. Elena's silence was an admission of guilt that provided the perfect opening for what I had planned as the final act of this elaborate drama. I instructed Sarah to schedule a mandatory meeting with both tenants for Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m., ostensibly to discuss the failed audit and potential lease violations. What Elena and Marcus didn't know was that this meeting would take place at my house on Elm Street, and that I would be revealing my identity as their landlord in front of witnesses who could document every word of their reactions. Patricia Valdez would be present as my legal representative. James Morrison would attend as the property assessor who had documented Elena's fraudulent claims, and Ray Kowalski would be there with recording equipment to capture everything for potential legal proceedings. But first, I wanted to give Marcus one final opportunity to separate himself from Elena's criminal behavior. I called him Tuesday evening, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Marcus, I was wondering if you could stop by for coffee tomorrow morning. There's something important I need to discuss with you." "Sure, Mom. Is everything okay? You sound serious." "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I just have some information that I think you should know about before you make any major decisions about your future." Marcus arrived at my house Wednesday morning looking haggard and stressed. The past week of confronting Elena about her fraudulent documentation had clearly taken a toll on him. "Mom, I have to tell you something," he said before I could even serve the coffee. "I think Elena might be in some kind of trouble. She's been acting strange, making phone calls at weird hours, and she won't show me the receipts for work she claims we did on the house." This was the opening I had hoped for. "What kind of work, Marcus?" "Kitchen renovations, bathroom upgrades, built-in shelving. According to Elena, we've spent over $15,000 on improvements, but I can't find any record of us paying for any of it. When I ask her about it, she gets defensive and accuses me of not trusting her." I set down my coffee cup and looked at my son with a mixture of love and sadness. "Marcus, what if I told you that I know exactly where the money for those improvements came from?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Elena didn't pay for any of those renovations. The landlord funded every improvement through the property management company." Marcus stared at me. "How could you possibly know that?" I took a deep breath. "Because I am the landlord, sweetheart. I own the house you've been living in for the past 3 years. The color drained from Marcus's face. That's impossible. We rent from Meridian Properties. The landlord is some investment company." Meridian Properties manages the house for me. I established an LLC called Riverside Holdings to purchase the property, and I've been subsidizing your rent to the tune of over $2,300 every month. The market rate for your house is $3,500, Marcus. You've been paying $1,200. Marcus sat in stunned silence for several long moments. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I wanted it to be a surprise. I was planning to give you the deed as a gift on your 5th wedding anniversary. I thought it would bring Elena and me closer together, knowing that I had been supporting your dreams from the beginning." "Oh my God," Marcus said, burying his face in his hands. "Elena's been trying to defraud you. She's been planning to claim compensation for improvements that you paid for yourself." "I know, Marcus. I know about the forged documents, the fake receipts, the meetings with Trevor Hutchins. I know about all of it." Marcus looked up at me with eyes full of shame and devastation. "Mom, I swear I didn't know what she was doing. I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined she was committing fraud against you." "I believe you, sweetheart. That's why I'm telling you this now, before tomorrow's meeting. Elena is going to face serious consequences for what she's done, and I want you to have the chance to distance yourself from her criminal behavior." The next 24 hours passed slowly as I prepared for the confrontation that would expose Elena's deception in front of multiple witnesses. Patricia had prepared a comprehensive presentation of evidence, including the forged documents, the recorded conversations, the fraudulent claims, and the documented proof that I had funded all property improvements myself. Thursday afternoon. Arrived with unusual warmth for late October, as if even the weather wanted to witness Elena's downfall. At exactly 2 p.m., Sarah Chen knocked on my front door, followed by Elena and Marcus. Elena was dressed in her most professional outfit, a navy blazer and matching skirt, clearly expecting to face corporate representatives who would be impressed by her polished appearance. She carried the same manila folder she had used during Morrison's inspection, presumably filled with her fabricated documentation. Marcus looked like he might be sick. He had spent the previous day processing the revelation that his wife had been planning to defraud his own mother, and the weight of that knowledge was evident in every line of his posture. "Mrs. Richardson?" Elena said, looking confused as I opened the door. "I think there might be some mistake. We're supposed to meet with representatives from Meridian Properties about our lease." "There's no mistake, Elena. Please come in." As Elena. And Marcus entered my living room. Elena's confusion turned to visible alarm when she saw Patricia, Morrison, and Ray already seated and waiting. The formal setup with recording equipment and legal documents spread across my dining room table made it clear that this wasn't going to be a routine tenant meeting. "I don't understand," Elena said, her voice starting to waver. "Who are these people? Why are we meeting here?" I took my position at the head of the table, with Patricia beside me and all the evidence of Elena's fraud spread out before us. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Patricia Valdez, my attorney, James Morrison, the property assessor who documented your fraudulent improvement claims, and Ray Kowalski, the private investigator who has been monitoring your activities for the past month." Elena's face went white. "What is this? What's going on?" "This, Elena, is the moment when you discover who you've really been trying to defraud." I placed the property deed in front of her, along with the LLC documents that established my ownership of 1247 Willowbrook Drive. "I am the landlord you've been planning to steal from. I own the house you've been living in. I funded every improvement you've claimed as your own investment, and I have documented evidence of every lie you've told, every document you've forged, and every fraudulent scheme you've attempted to execute." Elena stared at the documents, her hands shaking as the full scope of her situation became clear. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You can't be... The landlord is Riverside Holdings LLC, which is owned entirely by me. I bought that house 3 years ago specifically so you and Marcus could live in it affordably while you built your life together. I've been subsidizing your rent by thousands of dollars every month out of love for my son, and hope that we could become a real family." Elena's composure finally cracked completely. "You're lying. This is some kind of setup. You can't prove any of this." Patricia calmly opened the first folder of evidence. "Actually, Elena, we can prove all of it. We have recordings of you presenting fraudulent documentation to a property assessor. We have evidence of you forging legal documents. We have recordings of your conversations with Trevor Hutchins about defrauding the landlord. And we have your husband's testimony that you've been lying to him about your financial expenditures." Elena turned to Marcus with desperate eyes. "Marcus, tell them this is crazy. Tell them we paid for those improvements ourselves." Marcus looked at his wife with a mixture of sadness and disgust. "Elena, I've seen our bank records. We never paid for any of those improvements. You've been lying to me for months, maybe years." The moment when Elena realized that her elaborate deception had not only failed, but had been turned against her with devastating precision was almost too painful to watch. "Almost. I want a lawyer," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I'm not saying another word without a lawyer." "That's certainly your right," Patricia said calmly. "But Elena, you should know that we've already filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. The charges include forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft by deception." As Elena sat in my living room, surrounded by evidence of her crimes and facing the destruction of everything she had worked to build, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but a deep sadness for the waste of it all. "Elena," I said quietly, "I loved you like a daughter. I would have given you anything you needed if you had just asked honestly. Instead, You chose to lie, steal, and betray the trust of people who cared about you. Elena looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since I had known her, she had nothing to say. The truth had finally been revealed, and its weight was crushing everything Elena had built on the foundation of her lies. The legal machinery that I had set in motion moved with the relentless efficiency of justice finally being served. Within 72 hours of our confrontation, Elena was formally arrested on charges of felony fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs from the Willowbrook Drive house, my house, was captured by local news cameras, as her case had attracted media attention due to the unusual nature of her crimes. Trevor Hutchins was arrested the same day at his shabby office in downtown Millbrook Heights, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and aiding in the creation of false legal documents. The police discovered that Elena's case was just one of several similar schemes Hutchins had been orchestrating, targeting property owners across 3 counties. But while Elena and her accomplice faced the consequences of their criminal behavior, I found myself dealing with the more complex emotional aftermath of watching my family implode under the weight of her deceptions. Marcus moved back into my house on Elm Street the day after Elena's arrest, carrying only a single suitcase and wearing the expression of a man who had watched his entire world crumble. He spent the first week in his old childhood bedroom, emerging only for meals and mumbling apologies that I had to keep reassuring him were unnecessary. "I should have seen it, Mom," he said one evening as we sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen, where I had planned Elena's downfall just weeks earlier. All those times she claimed we were spending money on the house, all those receipts she said she was keeping track of. I should have demanded to see the bank statement sooner. Marcus, Elena is a very sophisticated manipulator. She fooled people far more experienced than you, including property assessors and legal professionals. You're not responsible for her choices. But I am responsible for not protecting you from her, he said, his voice thick with guilt. She was planning to steal from my own mother, and I was too blind to see it. The divorce proceedings began immediately, with Patricia Valdez representing Marcus to ensure he wouldn't be held liable for any of Elena's criminal activities. Elena had hired a public defender, having apparently spent her legal consultation budget on Trevor Hutchins's fraudulent services. The financial investigation revealed the full scope of Elena's deception over the 3 years they had lived in my house. Beyond the fraudulent improvement claims, she had been systematically overcharging Marcus for household expenses and pocketing the difference. The $89 Thai food dinners, the expensive takeout orders, the designer clothing purchases, she claimed were work necessities. All of it had been funded by money that Marcus believed was going toward their shared living expenses. She was embezzling from her own husband, Patricia explained during one of our meetings. Marcus was giving her money for utilities, groceries, and household expenses, but Elena was inflating those costs and using the extra money to fund her personal lifestyle. The pattern of financial manipulation extended back to before their marriage. Elena had convinced Marcus to take out credit cards in his name to pay for wedding expenses, then made minimum payments while spending the available credit on personal purchases. When Marcus had asked me for help with various financial emergencies over the years, many of those emergencies had been manufactured by Elena to cover her own spending. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was what Elena had done with the money I had loaned her for her car repairs. She had used that $4,200 to make a down payment on a luxury vacation to Tuscany that she had planned to surprise Marcus with for their upcoming anniversary, a vacation that would have been funded entirely by money she had stolen from me through fraudulent means. She was going to take you on a romantic vacation to Italy using money she stole from your mother, Patricia told Marcus. She probably would have presented it as evidence of her love and generosity. The criminal trial proceeded with the efficiency of a case where the evidence was overwhelming and the defendants had been caught in the act. Elena eventually accepted a plea bargain that sentenced her to 18 months in minimum security prison, 5 years of probation, and full restitution of all money she had attempted to defraud from me. Trevor Hutchins received a harsher sentence, 3 years in state prison, due to his extensive history of similar crimes and his role as the mastermind behind multiple fraud schemes. But the legal resolution was only the beginning of the healing process for Marcus and me. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Hartwell Design Group called me personally to apologize for Elena's behavior and to thank me for bringing the criminal activity to her attention before it could damage the firm's reputation. Elena's termination had been immediate and final, with the company cooperating fully with law enforcement to ensure that none of their clients or projects had been compromised by her dishonesty. Mrs. Richardson, I want you to know that Elena's references for future employment will reflect the circumstances of her termination, Dr. Walsh said. We cannot in good conscience recommend someone who has demonstrated such a pattern of deception and criminal behavior. The house on Willowbrook Drive sat empty for several months while I decided what to do with it. I had originally purchased it as a gift for Marcus and Elena, but those plans had obviously been derailed by Elena's criminal behavior. Initially, I considered selling the property and putting the entire situation behind me. But during one of our evening conversations, Marcus made a suggestion that surprised me. Mom, what if we renovated the house together and you moved in? It's bigger than this place. It has that beautiful garden space you've always wanted. And honestly, I think we could both use a fresh start. The idea of living in the house where I had discovered Elena's betrayal initially seemed impossible. But as Marcus and I walked through the empty rooms, I began to see the possibility of reclaiming the space and filling it with better memories. We spent the next 6 months working together to truly renovate the Willowbrook Drive house, not the superficial changes that Elena had made to suit her aesthetic preferences, but meaningful improvements that would make it a comfortable home for both of us. Marcus insisted on paying for all the renovation work himself, using money from the settlement of his divorce from Elena. I want to contribute something real to this house, he said. Something that actually belongs to both of us. We restored the original hardwood floors that Elena had wanted to replace with marble. We brought back the warm cream paint colors that complemented the house's traditional architecture. And in the dining room, where Elena had destroyed Robert's family heirloom cabinet, we created a memorial corner with photos and mementos from Robert's life. But the most meaningful change was in the garden, where Marcus and I planted a rose garden together. Varieties that Robert and I had talked about adding to our Elm Street garden, but never had the space for. As we worked together, I watched Marcus slowly heal from the trauma of discovering that his marriage had been built on lies and manipulation. He started dating again after the divorce was finalized, but this time with a wisdom and caution that I hoped would protect him from future predators like Elena. I know what red flags to look for now, Mom, he told me. Anyone who tries to isolate me from my family, anyone who won't show me financial records, anyone who makes me feel like I have to choose between them and the people who really love me, that person is not someone I want in my life. 1 year after Elena's arrest, I received a letter from her in prison. It was a rambling, self-pitying missive that blamed her crimes on childhood trauma, financial stress, and my interference in her marriage. There was no real acceptance of responsibility, no genuine remorse for the people she had hurt, and no indication that she understood the magnitude of what she had done. I showed the letter to Patricia, who read it and shook her head. Sociopaths rarely change, Mrs. Richardson. Elena still sees herself as the victim in this situation. She's not someone who will ever take genuine responsibility for her actions. I threw the letter away without responding. Elena had already taken enough of my time and emotional energy. I wasn't going to give her any more. Instead, I focused on the new life that Marcus and I had built together in the house that had once been the site of so much deception and pain. We hosted dinner parties for Marcus's friends, holiday celebrations for our neighbors, and quiet evenings where we could simply enjoy each other's company without the toxic presence of someone who had been systematically destroying our family from within. The final vindication came when the state's Attorney General's office contacted me about using Elena's case as part of a broader initiative to educate landlords about tenant fraud schemes. My experience had helped identify a pattern of criminal behavior that was affecting property owners throughout the region. Mrs. Richardson, your decision to fight back against this fraud may have prevented dozens of other property owners from being victimized, the Attorney General's representative told me. Elena Vasquez and Trevor Hutchins were part of a larger network that was targeting small-scale landlords, specifically because they believed individual owners would be less likely to have the resources to fight back. Knowing that my refusal to be victimized had protected other people from similar schemes provided a sense of closure that the legal proceedings alone couldn't offer. Elena had gambled that I would be too hurt, too trusting, or too afraid of family conflict to fight back against her criminal behavior. Her greatest mistake was underestimating the strength and determination of a woman who had spent 32 years protecting her son from people who would use his kindness against him. In the house, and Elena's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and manipulation, while mine became a testament to the power of strategic thinking and refusing to accept injustice. 3 years have passed since that gray October day when I revealed Elena's fraudulent schemes in my living room, and as I sit in the garden behind the Willowbrook Drive house, my house, watching Marcus teach his new girlfriend Amanda how to properly prune the roses we planted together, I find myself reflecting on how completely our lives have transformed. Amanda is everything Elena pretended to be: genuine, kind, and genuinely interested in being part of our family rather than extracting from it. She's a pediatric nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, and when Marcus first brought her home for dinner 8 months ago, her first question wasn't about the house or our financial situation, it was whether she could help me with the dishes. Mrs. Richardson, Marcus has told me so much about how you supported him through everything with Elena, she had said, rolling up her sleeves without being asked. I want you to know that I would never want to come between a mother and son. Family is everything to me. The contrast with Elena's calculated manipulation couldn't have been more stark. Where Elena had worked to isolate Marcus from me, Amanda actively encourages their relationship. Where Elena had seen me as an obstacle to overcome, Amanda treats me as someone whose opinion and presence she values. Last month, when Marcus told me he was planning to propose to Amanda, my first feeling wasn't anxiety or protectiveness. It was joy. After watching him suffer through the destruction of his first marriage, seeing him with someone who genuinely loves and respects him feels like watching him finally find his way home. I want to ask for your blessing, Mom, he had said. Not because I need permission, but because Amanda and I both want you to know that you'll always be an important part of our lives together. The engagement ring he showed me was modest but beautiful, purchased with money he had saved himself, not borrowed or begged from family members. It represented everything his relationship with Amanda has been built on: honesty, genuine affection, and mutual respect. Elena, meanwhile, has largely faded into the background of our consciousness like a bad dream that loses its power in daylight. She served 14 months of her 18-month sentence, with time off for good behavior, and was released to a halfway house in a neighboring county. According to the periodic updates I receive from Patricia Valdez, Elena has struggled to find steady employment due to her criminal record and the industry reputation she destroyed through her fraud conviction. The last I heard, she was working part-time at a retail chain store and living in a studio apartment that costs more per month than she was paying to live in my house. The irony isn't lost on me that Elena's greed and criminality ultimately landed her in exactly the kind of financial struggle she had been so desperate to avoid. Trevor Hutchins remains in state prison, where he was convicted of running what prosecutors called one of the most sophisticated tenant fraud operations in state history. His scheme had victimized over 40 property owners across 5 counties, stealing an estimated $300,000 through forged documents and false improvement claims. During his trial, it was revealed that Elena had been one of his most successful protégés, having successfully extracted $3,500 from her previous landlord in Westfield before moving on to target me. The prosecutor called Elena an eager student of criminal deception who had been particularly skilled at manipulating family relationships to facilitate her fraudulent activities. But the legal aftermath is just history now. What matters to me is the life Marcus and I have built in the space that Elena once tried to claim as her own. The house has been completely transformed, not just physically, but emotionally. The dining room where Elena once entertained guests, with stories about destroying Robert's cabinet, now hosts weekly family dinners where Amanda helps me cook traditional recipes that belonged to Robert's grandmother. The kitchen where Elena used to complain about my interference is now a place where Amanda and I plan meals together and share stories about our work. The garden has become my greatest source of pride. The roses Marcus and I planted have flourished beyond my wildest expectations, and I've added herb gardens, vegetable plots, and a small greenhouse where I grow orchids, a hobby I never had time for when I was working full-time and constantly worried about Marcus's financial crises. Amanda has proven to have an unexpected talent for gardening, and she's helped me design and plant what we call the Victory Garden, a section dedicated to flowers that bloom throughout the year, ensuring that there's always something beautiful growing no matter what season of difficulty we might be facing. The property management arrangement with Meridian Properties has evolved as well. Sarah Chen, who proved so helpful during the investigation of Elena's fraud, has become more than just a business associate. She's become a friend who stops by occasionally to see how the roses are doing and to share updates about other properties in her portfolio. Mrs. Richardson, you know that what you did, fighting back against Elena's fraud, has changed how we handle tenant improvement claims across all our properties, Sarah told me recently. We now require independent verification for any improvement claim over $1,000, and we've caught 3 other potential fraud cases because of the protocols we developed during your situation. Knowing that my experience has helped protect other property owners provides a satisfaction that goes beyond personal vindication. Elena's criminal behavior might have been motivated by greed and selfishness, but the aftermath has created systems that protect honest people from similar victimization. The financial impact of Elena's fraud attempt was ultimately minimal compared to the emotional damage she tried to inflict. The money I spent on private investigators, legal fees, and property assessments was more than recouped through the restitution settlement and the peace of mind that came from knowing Marcus was free from her manipulation. More importantly, the 3 years since Elena's arrest have allowed Marcus and me to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty and mutual respect. There are no more secrets between us, no more financial emergencies that turn out to be manufactured crises, and no more walking on eggshells around someone whose approval we feared losing. "Mom, I need to tell you something," Marcus said to me last week as we were working together in the Victory Garden. "These past 3 years living with you again have been some of the happiest of my adult life. Not because my marriage failed, but because I got to rediscover what it means to live with someone who actually cares about my well-being." The comment brought tears to my eyes, not because it was particularly profound, but because it represented such a stark contrast to the anxiety and manipulation that had characterized his relationship with Elena. When Marcus and Amanda get married next spring, the ceremony will take place in our garden, surrounded by the roses that symbolize the new growth that emerged from the destruction Elena tried to cause. Amanda has asked me to help her choose the flowers for her bouquet, and she wants to include roses from every variety we've planted together. "I want our wedding to celebrate not just Marcus and me," she told me, "but the family we're all creating together." As I write this final reflection on what I've come to think of as the Elena chapter of our lives, I'm struck by how completely justice was served, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple act of refusing to allow criminal behavior to go unpunished. Elena gambled that my love for Marcus would make me too weak to fight back against her fraud and manipulation. Her fundamental miscalculation was believing that loving someone means enabling their worst impulses or protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Instead, I discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be victimized, especially when that victimization enables someone else's destructive behavior. Elena's downfall wasn't the result of my desire for revenge. It was the inevitable consequence of her own choices finally catching up with her. I simply refused to make it easy for her to continue hurting people. Today, as I watch Marcus and Amanda planning their future together with the kind of open communication and genuine partnership that Elena never allowed in her marriage, I feel grateful for the painful lessons that brought us to this point. Elena taught me that family isn't defined by blood or marriage certificates, but by who shows up consistently with love, honesty, and genuine care for your well-being. And sometimes, protecting your real family means having the courage to fight back against those who would destroy it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.